Ni. Several dozen warhorses were so alarmed by the burst of sound that they reared up on their hind legs. All the warhorses of the Tong Luo had gone through rigorous training, but there was clearly something special about this booming voice. "General, look over there." A sharp-eyed Tong Luo general spotted something and pointed into the distance. Wuxia immediately followed that man's finger. Several thousand feet away, deep into the darkness, several men were standing atop a palace wall and watching him. It was apparent that they had been waiting for some time. Wuxia couldn't make out who those people were at first, but then a flickering torch on the wall revealed a man's face for the moment, and Wuxia instantly grimaced. Xianxia. Wuxia was stunned. Although he had never interacted with Xianxia very much, he was no stranger to the Great Tang's Minister of War. Not long after King Song was poisoned, Xianxia had claimed illness and retreated to his home, spending every day gardening. He had even temporarily handed his position as Minister of War to Wang Chong, becoming as inconspicuous as possible. Xianxia had not appeared in court since then. Wuxia had never imagined that he would reappear at a time like this and obstruct his army. "My lord, look there, over there. Xianxia has come with soldiers." "Humph, he's definitely come to stop us, but it's only around 2,000 men at most. Can that really stop our 10,000 Tong Luo cavalry? Charge in there. Kill them so that not even a shred of armor is left intact. Anyone who dares to oppose the Tong Luo can look forward only to death." Not far from Xianxia, numerous soldiers awaited in disciplined formation. These men all wore black armor, making them hard to pick out in the darkness. Moreover, the Tong Luo had been initially distracted by the 3,000 brightly armored soldiers of the penal court at the gate. However, they could tell that there were only around 2,000 soldiers there, nothing but dust in front of the 10,000 Tong Luo cavalry. "Great General, the King of Foreign Lands knew long ago that you had joined the First Prince, and he also knew that your soldiers would pass through here, so he had me wait for you. Why doesn't Great General come over to chat?" Xianxia's voice boomed in everyone's ears. "My lord, you can ignore him. We can just charge over and kill him," one of the Tong Luo generals sternly said, his eyes surging with killing intent. He pressed his legs against the flanks of his horse, spurring it into a charge so that he could slay Xianxia and his 2,000 men. The Minister of War possessed authority over all soldiers in the realm, and he also enjoyed the right to raise more soldiers than normal, but even this was a mere 2,000. Those soldiers near him were probably those private soldiers of his. But even though they were private soldiers that were all former elites of the Annan Protectorate, they were still lacking compared to the Tong Luo cavalry. A few charges would leave nothing left. "Wait!" To the general's surprise, Wuxia waved his hand, calling him to stop before he could get very far. "My lord!" All the soldiers stared in shock at Wuxia, and those who had ridden out immediately began to slow down. Orders were to be strictly obeyed. If Wuxia ordered them to stop, all the Tong Luo cavalry would come to a halt. A gale swept over the palace gate, and following it was a silence so eerie that one could hear a pin drop. Those war cries that had once soared to the heavens had almost instantly vanished. Wuxia sat motionlessly upon his horse as he stared at Xianxia, his eyes constantly shifting. From the moment the Tong Luo chose to join the First Prince, there had been no going back. No matter who stood in their way tonight, even Xianxia, Wuxia would charge in and kill all who stood in his way. But what had truly caused his firm resolve to waver and pull on the reins of his warhorse was the King of Foreign Lands. Wuxia's relationship with Wang Chong could never be described as good. Even when the Tong Luo cavalry had been ordered by the Sage Emperor to fight alongside Wang Chong against the Arabs, Wuxia's impression of Wang Chong had not improved. But deep down, one of the people Wuxia feared the most was the young King of Foreign Lands. The City of Steel, the Wuxian cavalry, the Mo Saber unit. This youth had wrought countless miracles. The Tong Luo had spent generations of sweat and blood, years upon years of training and research, to finally create the Tong Luo cavalry, whose name shook the world. But in just a few years, Wang Chong had created the Wuxian cavalry, which was not one bit inferior to the Tong Luo cavalry. It had even defeated the renowned Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire on the battlefield. In front of the king of foreign lands, the legends of the Tongluo instantly lost their luster. But what Abusi feared the most was Wang Chong's intellect and calculation ability. When the Arabs had brought their vast army to the walls of Khorasan, Abusi had believed that Wang Chong's defeat was certain. But to his surprise, this youth had seemingly predicted that extremely cold blizzard, digging out underground rooms in the city where his troops could weather the storm. He had even used the blizzard to launch a devastating attack on the Arabs that resulted in losses of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This sort of blizzard was almost unprecedented in the Arabian Empire, an event that was rare even once every 100 years, but Wang Chong had apparently known about it. This was truly unbelievable. And besides that, there was the border incident, the public order squad incident. Wang Chong had proved multiple times that he was one who made plans first and then moved out, who always had confidence in any venture he set out on. For each step he took, he had already calculated 3 steps, even 10 steps ahead. In this rebellion, the first prince had taken control over the 100,000 soldiers of the imperial army, and also the 3 garrisons of Baiting, Big Dipper, and Anxi. He had also taken control of the city gates, but he still feared Wang Chong. Even though the news of the Tongluo cavalry's betrayal had been leaked, Wang Chong should have known nothing about the exact time and route. But Xianxia Jianxiong had apparently known and been waiting. This made Abusi extremely uneasy. There was nothing wrong with being careful, and Abusi simply didn't care to act carelessly with Wang Chong. Wait here while I meet with him. No one is to move around without my order. Abusi narrowed his eyes as he sternly spoke. He gestured, calling over some of his more powerful generals, and then slowly trotted forward. Xianxia Jianxiong, surrounded by tensome old subordinates from the Annan Protectorate, had been watching Abusi and the Tongluo this entire time. Upon seeing Abusi ride over, one of the subordinates whispered, "My lord, the king of foreign lands was right. He really did stop." Xianxia Jianxiong subtly nodded in reply. The Tongluo were simply too powerful. No single army in the capital was their match. If they charged over without a word, not even Xianxia Jianxiong could stop them, and any scheme or plan he had concocted would have been useless. "You come with me. The rest of you should stay here." Xianxia Jianxiong rode forth on his longtime steed, Cloud Swallower, descending from the palace wall with several of his subordinates. The 2 groups stopped around 100 feet apart and silently stared at each other. Even though the Tongluo had stopped their advance for now, the atmosphere was only more nervous. Everyone knew that the moment this talk was over, the battle would begin. "Lord Xianxia, what does the king of foreign lands have to say?" Abusi broke the silence as he warily stared at Xianxia Jianxiong. Xianxia Jianxiong smiled and said, "He, great general. The king of foreign lands long ago predicted that you would move out at this time. The message he had me convey to you is this. This battle has nothing to do with the Tongluo. Great general still has time to pull on the reins to stop yourself from going over the cliff." The Tongluo generals frowned at these words. "The king of foreign lands sent you only to say this? If that's all, then please forgive this Abusi for finding it difficult to comply," Abusi declared. There was no taking back a loosed arrow. At this stage, how could he just fall back because of some words from Wang Chong or Xianxia Jianxiong? He would become the laughingstock of the world. "Ha ha! The king of foreign lands also predicted these words," Xianxia Jianxiong said. "The king of foreign lands also wanted me to ask you this. Great general has only thought about joining the first prince. But did great general not think about what would happen to the Tongluo if the first prince failed?" Buzz. Abusi and the Tongluo generals instantly paled. The first prince currently held the overwhelming advantage. The entire imperial city was under his control, and he had the assistance of army-shattering war god Ho Junji. Meanwhile, the sage emperor was confused and withdrawn. This was why Abusi had chosen to join the first prince. But if the first prince failed, Abusi didn't dare to imagine the consequences. "What does the king of foreign lands mean?" Abusi coldly said as his pupils constricted. Abusi wouldn't care if anyone else had said these words. But if Wang Chong had said them, he had to be concerned. "He, great general, until the dust has settled, One must never make reckless decisions. At the Battle of Talas, didn't everyone think that the Great Tang's defeat was certain? Xianxia Jianxiong said. Wuxia and the Tong Luo generals at his side turned grim. In the Battle of Talas, the Arabs had fielded 10 times as many soldiers as the Great Tang. No matter how one looked at it, the defeat of the Great Tang had seemed inevitable. But in the end, it was the Great Tang who won that battle. The Tong Luo had played no small part in this victory, so they were extremely familiar with this battle. The Tong Luo had initially believed that the first prince held the overwhelming advantage in this rebellion, but now they weren't so sure. Wuxia in particular had his brows deeply creased in unease. The first prince could not lose, or to be more precise, the Tong Luo could not lose. If they ended up standing on the wrong side, their entire tribe would be obliterated. This was a result he could not accept. Great General, the King of Foreign Lands, says that he deeply cherishes the friendship formed when he fought alongside Great General's men at Talas. In addition, he also knows that Great General must be very hesitant, so he prepared a letter. Great General need only look it over to understand. Xianxia Jianxiong smiled as he pulled a letter from his sleeve and passed it over. My lord. One of the Tong Luo generals at Wuxia's side immediately shook his head, wanting to stop him from taking the letter. The Tong Luo had already sworn fealty to the first prince. If they began to develop some ambiguous relationship with Wang Chong at a time like this, they might stir up unnecessary trouble, even earn the suspicion of the new emperor. This was not a wise decision. The courage of the Tong Luo is known throughout the world. They don't even fear death, yet they fear a trifling letter from the king of foreign lands. Xianxia Jianxiong indifferently said, a smirk on his lips. Wuxia had been hesitant at first, but upon hearing this, he coldly harumphed and drew the letter over. There's no need to say any more. This one understands how to proceed. Wuxia opened the letter and began to read through it. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. After sending off the letter, Xianxia Jianxiong had hidden his hands within his sleeves. While he was outwardly composed, he also couldn't help but be a little nervous at this time. This was a monumentally important battle, and the capital was on the razor's edge. Though Wang Chong had entrusted the letter to him, not even Xianxia Jianxiong was sure that he could persuade Wuxia and the Tong Luo cavalry. The air was so stagnant that it almost seemed frozen. As Wuxia read the letter, his eyes and face constantly shifted through various expressions. No one knew what he was thinking, and no one knew what Wang Chong's letter said. Great General, just as the King of Foreign Lands said, this battle is yet to be decided, so why must Great General intervene at this time? Rather than intervening when the situation is not yet settled, why not wait a while? Act as a spectator and remain in reserve, and then once the dust has settled and the outcome is clear, Great General can make your decision. In the end, if the first prince is winning, Great General can mobilize your army and strike, both minimizing the losses to the Tong Luo and keeping your promise to Ho Junji and the Eastern Palace. And if the first prince fails, Great General can join the King of Foreign Lands and work to wipe out the remnants of the Eastern Palace. In this way, you can express your loyalty to the Sage Emperor and avoid having the Tong Luo make any further mistakes that would lead them beyond salvation. Is this not a win-win situation? Much better than the Tong Luo's current plan of action? Xianxia Jianxiong firmly said. The Tong Luo do not exceed 10,000. Each Tong Luo cavalry under Great General's command was obtained through excruciating effort. Must they be wasted on this sort of rebellion? Great General, please reconsider. These final words clearly had an effect on Wuxia and the Tong Luo generals at his side. It was true. Unlike other soldiers, each Tong Luo cavalry required 10-some years of bitter training. It was precisely for this reason that the imperial household rarely dispatched the Tong Luo cavalry for external wars. The King of Foreign Lands was no ordinary person. He was acknowledged by all the Great Tang as the new war god. As his letter had said, if he gathered his Wuxian cavalry and Mo saber unit and threw aside everything else to attack the Tong Luo cavalry, then even if the Tong Luo won, it would come at a heavy price. The Tong Luo did not exceed 10,000. Even the loss of a few thousand men would take ages to recover from. The Tong Luo could not endure this sort of loss. The Tong Luo had already been forced to expend much of their reserves after the Battle of Talas. "Father, you can't." Just when Wuxia and the other Tong Luo generals were being swayed, a cold voice came from behind them. "The first prince is ascendant, so father can't trust their arguments. Wang Chong is the greatest enemy of the Hu, and he once wrote a memorial specifically criticizing us. Father, did you forget? His words can't be trusted." A young figure was riding toward them on a Tong Luo steed, his expression cold and aloof. "Abu Tong." Xianxia Jianxiong glanced at this youth and grimaced. The speaker was none other than Wuxia's youngest son. He had vaguely heard some things about what had happened between Wang Chong and Abu Tong. When Wang Chong was still obscure and he was at Kunwu training camp, he had once stripped Abu Tong naked and tied him to a bamboo pole, humiliating him in front of the entire camp. This matter had once been a hot topic in the capital, discussed in all the taverns and tea houses. Xianxia Jianxiong had also heard of this matter being talked about in a tavern when he first entered the capital. Abu Tong clearly held a grudge over this matter and had emerged to take his revenge. This would be fine at any other time, but at this moment, it was extremely disadvantageous for his side. "Oh no! This is going to be difficult." Xianxia Jianxiong's subordinates all scowled. As expected, Wuxia, after hearing Abu Tong's words, quickly hardened up, his face turning cold and dark. It was true. Amongst all the Han commanders, Wang Chong was the one most opposed to the Hu. He had once upset all the Hu of the realm with a single memorial, and he had also succeeded in causing the imperial court to put aside the regional commander policy that emphasized greater importance for the Hu. In this aspect, Wang Chong was the greatest Han foe of the Hu. Moreover, while Wang Chong had many soldiers under his command, he had barely any Hu commanders. Almost all his officers were Han. While he would work together with Hu, he would never place them in high positions. Abu Tong's words had hit the mark. Just when it seemed like the Tong Luo were about to attack, a jeering laugh came from up ahead. "Ha ha ha, Abu Tong. His Highness was right about you. For the sake of a personal grudge, you don't even mind casting aside the fate of the entire Tong Luo tribe. Who goes there?" Abu Tong exploded in rage and turned toward the direction of the palace gate. A young horseman rode out from behind the 3,000 fearful penal court soldiers. "Abu Tong, have you already forgotten me?" The young horseman smiled as he took off his helmet, revealing a young and energetic face. "Qi Weisi." Abu Tong scowled upon seeing that youthful face. He could never have forgotten that young man who had been at Wang Chong's side when he was being hung up naked on that bamboo pole. He had heard that after completing his training at Kunwu training camp, Qi Weisi had left for Yuzhou. He had never expected Wang Chong to call this youth back and plant him in the ranks of the penal court soldiers. "Bastard!" Abu Tong clenched his fists and silently cursed. He was certain that Wang Chong had left Qi Weisi here to deal with him. As expected, Qi Weisi began to ride toward Tong Luo Great General Wuxia. "Great General, the quarrel between Abu Tong and His Highness is a personal grudge, but His Highness and Great General are discussing the future and welfare of the entire Tong Luo tribe. I trust that there is no need for me to tell Great General which one is more important. His Highness has never been on good terms with the Hu. His Highness has never denied this. But whether it is Hu or Han, His Highness has always kept his word. In addition, His Highness also asked me to convey a message. Great General, rather than worrying about His Highness, you should worry more about the Sage Emperor. As long as the Sage Emperor lives, who in the realm would dare to do the Tong Luo harm?" As Qi Weisi spoke, he subtly glanced at Abu Tong, who immediately scowled even more. It took 10 years to hone a sword. After spending several years on the frontier, Qi Weisi and the other students of Kunwu training camp had been transformed. Like unpolished jade being slowly sculpted and chiseled into a fine statue, they were finally beginning to reveal their luster and radiance. Putting aside anything else, just the fact that Qi Weisi could speak so freely in front of Tong Luo Great General Wuxia was proof of the momentous transformation he had experienced. Qi Weisi's words, particularly his mention of the Sage Emperor, clearly had an effect on Wuxia, and he finally made up his mind. It was true. Wang Chong didn't matter, as the one who made decisions in this empire would always be the Sage Emperor. And the Sage Emperor had always treated the Tong Luo most generously. As Abusi raised his head, his eyes slowly turned hard and determined. Xianxia Jianxiong, just as you desire, the Tong Luo will wait in reserve, but don't celebrate just yet. I will give you 15 minutes at most. If your side is defeated or is still caught in a stalemate, I will attack without hesitation. Upon saying this, Abusi waved his hand and rode away. Father! Abutong paled. He had never imagined that Qi Weixi's few words would change his father's mind. He quickly rode after Abusi and tried to stop him, but all he earned for his efforts was a cold rebuke. Disobedient son! Shut your mouth! Have you not humiliated me enough? The sight of Abusi's cold eyes immediately rendered Abutong speechless. Gallop! Hooves thundered as Abusi withdrew his 10,000 Tong Luo cavalry. But this was only a temporary withdrawal from the palace gates, not a wholesale retreat. Hiss! As Xianxia Jianxiong watched the Tong Luo leave, he sighed in relief. Although he had spent nearly 20 years as the Anan Protector General and had spent almost his entire life in danger, and although he was the fierce tiger of the empire, Xianxia Jianxiong had found this bloodless negotiation the most dangerous event in his life by far. After all, there was simply too much on the line in this battle. This negotiation was almost ruined by that Abutong. It's good His Highness was ready. Xianxia Jianxiong turned to Qi Weixi and inwardly rejoiced. His old subordinates behind him also found themselves still shivering from fear. For a moment, they had sensed that the Tong Luo great general had already made up his mind to attack. They had done their best to appear calm, but if the Tong Luo cavalry had charged, they really wouldn't have been able to stop them. Qi Weixi smiled and said, "Heh, His Highness was also taking precautions. If it had been possible, I would have preferred fighting on the battlefield." In all things, preparation led to success and lack of preparation led to failure. Wang Chong had also not known that Abutong would appear, but he had still called Qi Weixi back and planted him in the penal court soldiers. It was just his habit to be so cautious. The Tong Luo aren't that easy to persuade. They're simply moving according to what benefits them. Right now, our first priority is to find a way to help Wang Chong break this stalemate. Xianxia Jianxiong said. When the nest was overturned, would the eggs still be safe? If they didn't stop the first prince, countless people would be dragged into this mess. And Xianxia Jianxiong could not even guarantee his own safety. This was one of the reasons he had appeared here. Hiya! With these thoughts in mind, Xianxia Jianxiong quickly began to head back. Everyone listen up. We're heading for the Imperial Palace's west gate. Xianxia Jianxiong charged off with his 2,000 soldiers, passing through the open gate of the Imperial Palace and heading for the west gate. The Imperial Palace of the Great Tang had 4 main gates: east, south, west, and north. The one that King Qi and the other officials used to enter and exit the palace was known as the Palace Gate, but to be more precise, this was the South Gate. The East Gates and West Gates could also be used, but they were much less famous than the South Gate. One of his old subordinates couldn't help but worriedly ask, "My lord, the Tong Luo still haven't left. What do we do if they—" Relax. Abusi and the Tong Luo regard promises far more importantly than we do. If not, the Tong Luo cavalry would have never become renowned throughout the world. As Xianxia Jianxiong spoke, a massive black halo erupted from beneath his feet and spread to all his soldiers. The strength of these 2,000 elites exploded as they rushed toward the west gate. Not long after Xianxia Jianxiong had gone, Qi Weixi smiled and glanced in the direction of the Qian, Center, and Kuan gates. But instead of heading there, he passed through the gates and rode off in another direction. This battle had just begun. He had an even more important task ahead of him. Elsewhere, Wang Chong and Hou Junji silently stared at each other while Mayasame Ayaka, the 5th prince, Li Jingzhong, and Fei Yuhan nervously watched. The 10,000 Tong Luo cavalry had surged over like a massive wave, come to a sudden stop, and then quickly retreated. This short period of time had been packed with twists and turns. Even though they couldn't see anything, the shift in the mood told everyone that something had happened with the Tong Luo. After all, given their speed, the Tong Luo should have already been attacking the three gates. Whoosh! A few seconds later, a gerfalcon descended and landed amongst the Imperial army stationed at Ho Junji's side. An Imperial army soldier glanced at the report, paled, and rushed up. "My lord, bad news. The Tong Luo?" But before he could walk very far, a sharp rebuke exploded in his ears. "Silence!" Fei Yuhan suddenly turned his head, and his freezing eyes immediately shut the Imperial army soldier up. It was obvious that the Tong Luo had withdrawn. Wouldn't announcing this fact just ruin morale for no reason? Fei Yuhan naturally would not permit him to do such a thing. "I truly underestimated you. To think that you would make him withdraw." Ho Junji's eyes slowly turned grave as he stared at the youth seated across from him. "Ha, as I said, Senior can persuade him to work for you, and so can I," Wang Chong indifferently said. Ho Junji narrowed his eyes, and while his expression remained calm, his mind was in turmoil. He was forced to sigh in praise of this youth. The Tong Luo cavalry formed an extremely important part of his plan, but Wang Chong had easily undone their assault. It had been a very long time since he had battled with such an equal. An invisible energy began to seethe inside Ho Junji's body, like a precious sword slowly being pulled from its sheath. "It's been a long time since I last felt like this." A thought suddenly occurred to Ho Junji. He was forced to admit that this youth made his blood seethe and boil. The world continued in silence as Wang Chong and Ho Junji stared, neither of them backing down, neither of them speaking. It was an extreme silence best described with the saying "silence reigns." Yet still one seems to hear the rumble of thunder. This sight made everyone's hearts shiver in fear. These two are just too frightening. Fei Yuhan felt cold sweat collecting on his temples and dripping down. For a second, he felt that even though there were more than 100,000 soldiers doing battle in the capital, all of them were merely pieces on the chessboard between the two. In this game, the two could transform the world with a wave of their hand. Whether these soldiers lived or died in this rebellion depended on just a single thought from one of these two. As each small piece landed on the board, he felt like peals of thunder were exploding in his heart. "You're truly someone who leaves a deep impression. Since ancient times, the heroes have always been the young, and the waves of the river in the back are always pushing down the waves in the front. This one move from you tells me that you don't disgrace your title as war god," Ho Junji finally said. "But even so, you have still failed to break through. In the end, you will lose this battle. In addition, it seems that it's about time." Ho Junji smirked at Wang Chong. "Buzz." Upon hearing this, Wang Chong grimaced. Behind him, Mayasame Ayaka, Li Heng, and Li Jingzhong turned nervous, a sense of ill foreboding surging in their minds. With the Tong Luo withdrawn, they had believed that they had escaped disaster, but from Ho Junji's reaction, it seemed that this was not so. Whoosh! Ho Junji reached into his jar with his right hand and removed the fourth piece. As the light of the flickering torches gleamed on the piece, everyone felt like their souls had been seized, and tension completely saturated the air. Clap! By the time anyone could react, Ho Junji had already placed his piece on the board. For a moment, the entire world was drained of sound. Boom! As if in response to the placement of this piece, the sounds of fighting from the depths of the palace drowned out the battles at the Qian, Center, and Kuan gates, and blazing flames soared to the sky. At almost the same time, a bird descended from the skies and landed amidst Ho Junji's troops. A few moments later, an excited Imperial army soldier rushed over. Reporting, "My lord, news from the rear. The Saint Martial Barracks has been broken." This short report was like a boulder crashing down, immediately stirring up great waves. What? How could this be? How could the Saint Martial Barracks have been so easily broken? The fifth prince had originally been very composed, but this news was like a bolt of lightning. His face paled and his body became unsteady. The Saint Martial Barracks was an important barrier for Taiji Palace. Without the defense of the Saint Martial Barracks, the Sage Emperor was in grave danger. "Your Highness!" Li Jingzhong helped up Li Heng in panic. All of this had happened too quickly. The king of foreign lands should have been able to deal with Ho Junji and the first prince. and it seemed like many of Hou Junji's attacks had already been thwarted. So this development had come completely unexpectedly. To think that the St. Martial Barracks would fall at a time like this. Kill! The cries of fighting from the depths of the Imperial Palace were deafening, and one could hear miserable screams amidst the clashing of weapons. Even though they couldn't see what was going on, they could tell that the St. Martial Barracks was in a complete rout. This force had been smaller than the First Prince's force, and had only held on using the formation and terrain. But even this stiff resistance had finally reached its limit. On the other side, Wang Chong's face had turned exceptionally grim. Wang Chong, you don't have much time left. The St. Martial Barracks has fallen. Can you reverse the tides of the battle in the same way as you did with the Tongluo? Hou Junji sternly said. The mood was heavy as everyone stared at Wang Chong. At the same time, at the avenue leading to Taiji Palace. Kill! Furious war cries filled the air as tens of thousands of Imperial Army elites charged forward under the light of numerous torches. Underneath their feet were pools and rivers of blood that packed the air with a thick and pungent scent. Shattered weapons littered the avenue, alongside the fallen and blood-drenched corpses of both Imperial Army and St. Martial Barracks soldiers. At the very end of the avenue, amidst the clashing of metal and stellar energy, an army adorned in golden armor and covered in wounds was retreating. With each step they retreated, more of them fell to the ground, never to rise again. Without the support of the formation, the overwhelmingly outnumbered St. Martial Barracks was in wholesale retreat. Clang! At this moment, far away at the very back, a man wearing an imperial robe and golden boots landed atop a high wall. Escorted by top-class guards, the First Prince had arrived to survey the battlefield. Victory is near. The First Prince stared at the familiar silhouette of Taiji Palace, a fierce flame burning in his heart. His eyes at this time were so bright that they seemed like miniature suns. Once we occupy Taiji Palace, this prince can finally become the true sovereign of the 9 and 5. The First Prince spread apart his arms, allowing his hair and cape to dance in the wind. What did it matter if the Tongluo had failed? In the end, he would still win. Once this day was over, he would subjugate the entire realm and punish all those who had tried to stop him, including the Wang clan. Everyone, hear my order. Attack! The First Prince pulled out his sword and pointed it at Taiji Palace. The war cries instantly increased in volume and ferocity, and the soldiers surged forward in a relentless flood. Time continued to pass, and in this suffocating atmosphere, everyone continued to stare at Wang Chong, Hou Junji included. Heh! After what seemed like an eternity, Wang Chong finally opened his mouth. His eyes moved from Hou Junji to the chessboard. Even if Senior manages to get through the St. Martial Barracks, it's still pointless. Buzz. Everyone on the Eastern Palace side was struck dumb, and even Hou Junji couldn't help but reveal a sliver of surprise. It was clear that Wang Chong's reaction had not been expected, but no one understood what he meant. Pushing through the St. Martial Barracks was pointless? The St. Martial Barracks was in full retreat, and without them, who could stop the First Prince? What does he mean by this? Fei Yuhan deeply frowned. He would have heartily laughed if anyone else had said this, but the speaker was Wang Chong, the new war god of the Great Tang. Even the army-shattering war god had suffered setbacks several times against this youth. Everyone knew that he had a deeper meaning behind these words. While the clamor of fighting continued in the distance, it was eerily quiet here. What? Even at this stage, you still think you have a chance? Hou Junji quickly regained his composure. Putting down his cup, he smirked. Heh! It hasn't been 30 minutes yet, right? Wang Chong indifferently said. He glanced at a nearby bronze burner. Inside the burner was an incense stick, of which only a small portion had yet to burn away. An Imperial Army soldier had brought it up under Hou Junji's guidance. That's true. Hou Junji glanced at that incense stick and seemed to understand. He couldn't help but grin as he nonchalantly spoke. But what does it matter if I give you this meager amount of time? The Chen Gate, Center Gate, and Kuan Gate, and even the heart of the Imperial Palace were all under his control. He thought that Wang Chong might be hiding some other move, but it turned out that he was just making a pointless last-ditch struggle. If that was all Wang Chong had, then even if he were given another whole incense stick to burn for another 30 minutes, he would still end up defeated. Wang Chong said nothing. Ho Junji's attitude was obvious, but Wang Chong had no desire to argue. Reality could overcome the strongest argument. With these thoughts in mind, Wang Chong subtly glanced in the direction of Taiji Palace. Kill! Tens of thousands of Imperial Army soldiers charged through the long avenue toward the looming edifice of Taiji Palace. At this stage, whether they had initially been fooled or not, everyone understood what tonight's operation meant. Rebellion was a crime that resulted in the execution of one's entire clan. So there was no going back. This only emboldened these soldiers to madly throw themselves into battle. Rumble! An Imperial Army horseman charged forward on his horse, his halo thrumming beneath him. Boom! His spear slammed into an armored soldier of the St. Martial Barracks, who screamed as he hurtled through the air like a ragdoll. Boom! The man landed in an explosion of gore and blood. Around him, more and more St. Martial Barracks soldiers were falling. Only 600 or 700 of the St. Martial Barracks soldiers were left, and they were falling back to Taiji Palace. Once they fell, the way to the supreme center of power in the empire would be open. From a distance, one could see stalwart figures standing guard on the flawless white jade steps leading to Taiji Palace. The legendary Dragon Guards. Although the Imperial Army was forbidden from approaching Taiji Palace, its soldiers had still heard the tales of the powerful Dragon Guards who protected the Sage Emperor. But from start to finish, the Dragon Guards had been like statues, standing there motionlessly no matter how fierce the battle was, their feet seemingly rooted to the ground. If one could not sense the power from their bodies, one would have believed that the Dragon Guards had long ago lost their lives, leaving behind only statues. This is all there is to the mighty Dragon Guards. In the charging army, an Imperial Army elite looked up at these motionless guards with a look of disdain. All the Imperial Army soldiers revered the Dragon Guards, but these Dragon Guards were so rotten that they only know how to stand. If they didn't even intervene in this battle, what use were they? Moreover, there were less than 100 Dragon Guards. Could they be a match for the tens of thousands of soldiers of the Imperial Army? Charge! Today is the day I make my name and become a noble. The Imperial Army elite raised his sword and roared. Spurring his horse, he joined the flood of soldiers in the charge. Boom! As tens of thousands of soldiers charged, they produced such a momentum that the world itself seemed to pale. The remaining St. Martial Barracks soldiers were quickly scattered, and that Imperial Army elite charged past the rest of the army and up the white steps toward one of the motionless Dragon Guards. 10 steps, 9 steps, 6 steps, 5 steps. The distance was rapidly shrinking, but that Dragon Guard continued to stare in the southeast direction, truly appearing to be a motionless statue. 3 steps, 2 steps. The Imperial Army elite's body blazed with stellar energy, and his body brimmed with excitement. But a moment later, a resounding clang exploded in his ears. The Imperial Army elite's heart went cold as he looked toward the source of the noise. At the waist of the Dragon Guard, a broad hand had gripped the hilt of his sword and begun to turn. Turning at the same time was that seemingly petrified Dragon Guard. As his warhorse charged, the Imperial Army elite finally had a clear view of the Dragon Guard's eyes. It was a pair of cold and emotionless eyes, gleaming with the sharpness of a blade. When those eyes stared at him, the Imperial Army elite felt like he had been dropped into an icehouse. His eyes flew open as the fear of death gripped his heart. At this moment, the Dragon Guard suddenly struck. No one could see what he did, only that when the Imperial Army elite jumped forward, a bolt of blinding energy shot out of the Dragon Guard's hand. Boom! For a moment, all other sound was drowned out by the roar of this terrifying bolt of energy. Time seemed to stop, the Imperial Army elite apparently frozen in the air. And then that vicious wave of sword chi howled past, cleaving the man and his horse neatly down the middle. After slicing through that Imperial Army elite, the sword chi continued to fly forward, hurtling into the soldiers behind him. This sword chi was more than 1,000 feet long, even slicing through the air. Kaboom! With an earth-shaking explosion, the normal flow of time was restored. Thousands of Imperial Army soldiers screamed as they were blasted away and obliterated by the explosion. As the wave of sword chi swept through, it scattered blood and severed limbs through the area. "Careful! Defend!" Piercing and frightened screams resounded through the sky. In the end, those statue-like dragon guards had still not moved. But no one had expected those dragon guards to be so frightening. Yet this was far from the most frightening thing, because when that dragon guard moved, all the dragon guards in front of Taiji Palace slowly turned around, their hands gripping their weapons as they glared with cold eyes. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, one wave of sword chi after another exploded into the dense ranks of the Imperial Army, raw power erupting into the heavens. Aya! Howling gales swept out. The area around Taiji Palace began to fiercely quake, and one could hear the plaintive screams of the dead and dying. These sounds traveled far into the night, and even though no one could see what was happening there, the screams alone communicated the fear and helplessness those soldiers felt before their imminent deaths. What in the world happened? Wasn't the St. Martial Barracks broken? What's going on? The Imperial Army soldiers broke out in a cold sweat, their expressions turning panicked. Death was common on the battlefield, but the sounds of the dying they had heard before were nothing like this, with the fear far surpassing the pain. What had these soldiers encountered that would make them scream like this? Everyone felt unsettled by those screams. Mayase Mayaka and the others looked in the direction of Taiji Palace in alarm and unease. All they could see from their perspective was dazzling waves of sword chi piercing through the darkness. Even though they didn't know the exact situation, they had no doubt that Wang Chang's judgment was correct. While the St. Martial Barracks had been broken, the first prince had not yet managed to get into Taiji Palace. He still had one unimaginably powerful barrier in front of him. Next to Mayase Mayaka, Li Heng's eyes flashed in realization. It's the Dragon Guards. Ho Junji stared at Wang Chong and suddenly broke the silence. So, your last resort is the Dragon Guards? Although the St. Martial Barracks has fallen, Senior has still not won. Yes? Wang Chong indifferently said. As he spoke, he took out a piece and slowly placed it behind Ho Junji's black dragon. The white pieces there were sparse, forming a vague pronged formation that served as one final and fragile barrier. Unlike before, this piece landed without a sound, but despite this, one could feel an surging undercurrent that made this piece more dangerous than the others. At this stage in the game, only the last step was missing. The board was apparently calm, but the actual situation was fraught with danger. A single piece played incorrectly would result in a complete loss. A complete reversal could happen at any moment. At this stage you still think you can win? Ho Junji shook his head. The explosions and screams in the distance were only getting louder and louder, but Ho Junji was unperturbed. He apparently did not care how many soldiers of the Imperial Army died. The Dragon Guards are Taiji Palace's last defense, and there are only several dozen of them. No matter how strong they are, how many people can they kill? 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000? No matter how strong they are, a point will come where their strength runs out. You want to use the Dragon Guards to buy time, so that you can gather more energy from the mountains and rivers to resist my 100,000 God Devil execution formation? But you only put off the inevitable. You cannot alter the difference in strength, much less your eventual defeat. Ho Junji nonchalantly said. His sharp and perceptive eyes had seemingly seen through all of Wang Chong's plans. Wang Chong looked up and calmly said, Until the last moment has come, how can Senior know who has one? How truly disappointing. It seems this old man regarded you too highly. The Dragon Guards surround Taiji Palace. So how could this old man not take into account such an obvious factor? Ho Junji could only shake his head in disappointment. Dragons and serpents dance, signifying a changing of ownership in the realm. Did you think that the Eastern Palace decided to take such significant action without even preparing for something like this? As Ho Junji spoke, everyone paled. The power of the Dragon Guards was unquestionable, and given what was going on in the depths of the palace, their strength had reached an unbelievable level. But if Ho Junji had already accounted for this, then their defeat was imminent. Kree. At this moment, a sharp whistle came from the depths of the imperial palace, cutting through the darkness. "My lord, everyone has arrived as you ordered." An imperial army soldier standing next to Fei Yuhan announced with an abrupt step forward, causing Fei Yuhan to shiver in alarm. This man had been standing next to him for so long, but he had not once noticed his presence. This man was undoubtedly one of Hou Junji's subordinates. "I suppose it's about time." Hou Junji smiled as he took a piece from his jar. Mayase Mayaka, Li Jingzhong, and Li Heng felt their hearts tighten and their breathing freeze. That tiny piece seemed to weigh more than 10,000 June and catch the eye more than the sun or moon. Everything fell silent, and time slowed to a crawl. Bang! Everyone watched as that piece no bigger than a thumb slowly descended onto the board. It was clearly an ordinary black piece, no world-destroying artifact. But when it hit the board, everyone felt like they could feel the world quake beneath them. Cree! A shrill whistle penetrated through the darkness, and other whistles came in response. A few moments later, powerful and brutal auras began to emerge from various parts of the imperial palace and converge on a single location. "Look over there!" A soldier from Jinyang Palace called out in alarm, and everyone turned to see what he was looking at. In the light of the torches, one could see black silhouettes flying toward the depths of the imperial palace. But this was not what was so shocking. A man in black flying through the air suddenly paused atop a wall. His body began to twist, and he raised his head up and howled like a monster. His body began to swell like a balloon, cracking and groaning as it grew to several times its original size. That terrifying form was not that of a human, and there wasn't only one. More and more of those men in black began to transform, fierce flames erupting from their bodies as they howled. Jumping from the wall, they continued toward the depths of the palace. "What is that?" Everyone shivered. Not even the soldiers of the imperial army had ever seen such frightening things. Stellar energy could not modify the body, but the transformations of those men in black had gone beyond the human domain and entered the realm of the bizarre. Plans made in the tent decide victory from 1,000 li away. "You've already lost." Hou Junji finally stood up from the table, unleashing a vast sea of energy from his body. As his energy raged and seethed, his eyes turned into those of a supreme hegemon. "In addition, I know that you sent men to Taiha Palace, but alas, I've already made plans and moved those people away. All your people will find is some soldiers I placed there. In addition, while we were playing chess, the Eastern Palace's men should have already set off for the Four Quarters Embassy, King Song residence, and your Wang clan residence. Soldiers have also been dispatched to the First Prince's opponents in court. If you go back now, you might still be in time. Besides that, Zhang Zheng's army should have arrived at the capital by now and should enter soon. Taiji Palace, the Qian Gate, the Center Gate, the Kuan Gate, the capital. You don't have even the slightest hope." Hou Junji looked down on Wang Chong in contempt. All of Wang Chong's reactions in this chess game had been within his expectations. Like a moth falling into a spider web, despite his endless struggles, he could never escape. Wang Chong was simply too lacking compared to him. "Your ability in contrast to your age is truly astonishing, but unfortunately on the battlefield, there is only victory and defeat. Age is irrelevant." Upon saying this, Hou Junji turned around and began to walk away, exuding an enormous pressure that swept over everyone in the area. Mayase Mayaka and the others felt despair sweep over them. They had lost. But it couldn't be. It was impossible. Li Jingzhong's legs gave out, and Li Heng hastily went up to help him. At this time, Li Heng's face was grave and seemingly extremely weathered and tired. This immense pressure made Fei Yuhan feel like it was almost impossible to breathe. Hou Junji was like a towering giant, and he blessed his good fortune that they were on the same side. Hou Junji slowly stepped away as the night winds gusted around him. As Hou Junji departed, countless men in black roared, turning into half Luwus and half Jubis, even transforming into Azuras. All of the monstrosities lunged toward Taiji Palace. On a high palace wall, one of the leaders of these men in black harshly ordered, "Kill them! Don't leave one alive." Those transformed men in black roared as they charged through the Imperial army and attacked the dragon guards on the White Steps. Boom boom boom. The area within 1,000 feet of Taiji Palace had long ago been turned into a gruesome hell. Those several dozen dragon guards were a human wall and also the most terrifying harvesting machine in the world. With one slash after another, they reaped the lives of those Imperial army elites. Aya! A dazzling wave of energy exploded against a group of charging Imperial army elites, blasting them away. Even their suits of armor that had been reinforced with numerous inscriptions could not stand against the sword chi, appearing as weak as paper. Amidst the successive explosions, countless Imperial army soldiers were dying. The dragon guards were making these soldiers feel fear and despair like never before. No matter how ferocious their attacks were, the several dozen dragon guards remained impregnable. Only now did they realize why the dragon guards had never participated in the battle, no matter how dangerous it was or necessary their assistance. It wasn't merely because of their loyalty, but because that level of battle wasn't even worth their intervention. The losses continued to mount, but at this moment, a half-Lu Wu man in black appeared, black energy seething off his body. He crouched down, and then instantly lunged toward one of the dragon guards with terrific speed. Clang! That dragon guard's eyes flashed, but his hands moved without hesitation. There was a resounding clang as a magnificent beam of sword chi cleaved through the air and sliced that half-Lu Wu in two. But a moment later, the inconceivable happened. The halved face of that man in black formed an eerie smile and continued to lunge at the dragon guard. One half of his body swung out and savagely seized the dragon guard's right hand. A hint of shock appeared in the cold and aloof eyes of the dragon guard. Although he was incredibly powerful, this was the first time in his life he was seeing something so bizarre. A man being cut in two would die without question. But even though this man in black had been cut in half, a powerful vitality persisted in his body that allowed him to not immediately die and seize the dragon guard's hand. The dragon guard's face twitched as he sensed danger. Kill him! As the first man in black grimly clenched the dragon guard's right hand, 7 other men in black, variously transformed into half-Lu Wus, half-Jubis, and Azuras, lunged at him from various directions. Bang! At this moment, 2 dragon guards came forward and unleashed 2 waves of sword chi at those men in black. Boom! 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 A series of explosions rang out, and those men in black dropped to the ground, their bodies cleaved apart. However, with the entry of the men in black, the battlefield gradually began to turn against the dragon guards. Awoo! More and more howling men in black joined the battle at Taiji Palace, and still more were coming. These transformed men in black might not have been any match for the dragon guards individually, but with their numbers, astonishing vitality, and flames that could burn away stellar energy, the dragon guards were being rapidly exhausted under their frenzied assault, even if their defensive line had yet to fall. The tens of thousands of Imperial army elites cried out as they surged forward in great waves. Bang! One of the dragon guards, tired out, was knocked over by a man in black, and a moment later, at least 8 men in black with reddened eyes lunged at him and finished him off. The surrounding dragon guards instantly grimaced at this sight. This was the first dragon guard to be killed in this battle, but it would not be the last. Thud! 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 Like dominoes, the dragon guards began to fall under the assault of the men in black. Ha ha ha! Kill them! Kill them! Kill them all! Far in the back, the first prince spread apart his arms and loudly laughed as he watched the dragon guards fall from atop the palace wall. Blood could stimulate a person's inner beast, and while he had managed to maintain his warm and gentle demeanor in front of others, once success was imminent, Li Ying was no longer prepared to restrain himself. The dragon guards were the greatest barrier to the throne. He could persuade the Confucian sect, King Qi, and the Grand Marshals, but he could not persuade the dragon guards. Li Ying would no longer waste any words on them. Since they would not submit, death would be their final home. Ah! The dragon guards screamed as they fell, but the men in black were also paying a gruesome price. For each dragon guard, many men in black would be cleaved in two. But the first prince did not care how many people were lost. A man of great ambitions did not worry over minor details. And besides, these men in black weren't even his subordinates. Imperial Father, my day has finally come. The first prince stared at Taiji Palace, an intimidating light in his eyes. Once all the dragon guards were dead, no one would be left to stop him, and he could finally realize his dreams. Get ready. I'm going over personally. Yes. The Eastern Palace guards around him quickly left to relay these orders. The winds carried thick plumes of smoke and the sounds of fighting and dying within and without the imperial city. Wait! When everyone was in despair, a voice resounded through the darkness. This voice was neither too loud nor too soft, containing little power, but it was enough to make Ho Junji stop. What? You still have something to say? Ho Junji indifferently asked, his expression cold. Although he had stopped, he had not turned his head. No matter what Wang Chong said, nothing could alter the final conclusion. All of this was pointless struggle. He, Senior, you seem to have forgotten that I have yet to make my move. As Wang Chong spoke, he thrust a finger into his jar and removed a white piece. Whoosh! Upon hearing Wang Chong's words and seeing him take that piece, everyone grimaced. And Ho Junji, who had already walked 100-some feet, suddenly frowned in uncertainty. Could it be? He still has another move. Fei Yuhan stared at Wang Chong in shock, his heart in turmoil. At this stage in the battle, his side was in firm control and was only one step away from seizing Taiji Palace. He truly couldn't think of any way that Wang Chong could win. But no one dared to take Wang Chong's words lightly. Not now, at any rate. What do you mean? Ho Junji finally turned around and stared at Wang Chong. He, Senior, did you forget that, in this game, Black moved first? Senior has made your move, but I haven't. Wang Chong raised the piece in his fingers and smiled. Only now did everyone realize that Wang Chong's expression was still relaxed and confident, his eyes gleaming and his mouth curled into a faint smile. Even at this most dire moment, he showed no sign of panic. It was like everything was still under his control. Upon seeing this, Ho Junji paled. But Wang Chong quickly looked away from Ho Junji, and everyone instinctively followed his gaze to the northwest. Rumble. After what seemed like a second dragged out for eternity, a giant firework exploded from the northwest, sweeping through the darkness and high into the heavens before fiercely erupting. The dazzling light was so bright that it could be seen from several dozen li. Finally here, a look of anticipation appeared on Wang Chong's face. Senior, it's my turn now. Wang Chong's relaxed voice resounded through the night as the white piece slowly began to descend. Time began to slow down and sound drained away. Everyone followed that piece as it slowly approached that golden chessboard. Bang! With the addition of Wang Chong's white piece, the world shook and groaned, and a battle that had seemed settled also became turbulent and uncertain. Rumble. The earth shuddered so fiercely that the chessboard and the pieces upon it began to tremble. Not only that, Wang Chong's origin immortal formation and Ho Junji's 100,000 God Devil execution formation, which had been like two grinding gears constantly wearing each other out, suddenly began to fuse together. If one could look down from the sky, they would see that the origin immortal formation based on the Qian, Center, and Kuan gates was beginning to slowly transform. It was fusing with the energies of the soldiers stationed at the east, west, and north gates, creating an enormous and slowly turning ring. The center of this circle was the same as the core of the 100,000 God Devil execution formation. These two formations shared the same core. Bang! With a resounding boom, the large and small formations, outer and inner, fused together. This is impossible. Ho Junji sensed this shift, and his composure instantly fell apart. He was the creator of the 100,000 God Devil execution formation, and understood its attributes and energy flow more than anyone else. Others could only sense that the two formations were slowly fusing into one, but Ho Junji could tell that this was not a simple fusion. The small and complex channels used by the 100,000 God Devil execution formation had connected with the ones used by Wang Chong's formation. In other words, Wang Chong's origin immortal formation was no longer drawing energy from the mountains and rivers around the capital. It was using the same source of power as the 100,000 God Devil execution formation, the Three Emperors formation. How could this be? Ho Junji gave that distant youth a flabbergasted stare. Wang Chong had managed to shift around his formation so that it was completely in sync with his 100,000 God Devil execution formation. This wasn't even considering how excruciatingly difficult it was to completely align the energy flows of two different formations. Reaching this mastery of formations was realistically impossible. And just theoretically speaking, connecting two energy channels together required the same level of understanding in the 100,000 God Devil execution formation as Ho Junji's, but this couldn't be. This was Ho Junji's first time using this formation. Ho Junji was proud of his intelligence, but this was not something even he could possibly calculate. "Milord, I'll go and inform His Highness," Fei Yuhan suddenly said. As the Eastern Palace Guard captain, he was very familiar with the 100,000 God Devil execution formation. He turned around and immediately began to make his way toward the depths of the palace, but he was quickly called back. "There's no need. It's too late," Ho Junji calmly said, staring at Wang Chong as he waved his hand. Given how long Wang Chong had planned for this, there could be no flaw in this step, no opportunity given to his foe to adjust. Anything done was simply too late. Senior is truly observant. It really is too late. Wang Chong looked away from the board and at Ho Junji. He slowly began to stand up, a smirk on his face. Soldiers were trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Wang Chong had waited a very long time for his men to be perfectly positioned. So how could he have allowed Ho Junji to adjust the formation as he pleased? "Qichin, it's about time. What comes next will depend on you," Wang Chong silently said as he glanced in the direction of the center gate. He had made a copy of the Origin Immortal Formation diagram and given it to Su Qichin some time ago, and she understood all of his strategic objectives. Given her intelligence, she presumably understood how to proceed. Kree. As if in response to Wang Chong's thoughts, a sharp whistle came from the direction of the center gate. Boom! The earth began to tremble, and massive booms and bangs could be heard from all around the imperial palace. Deep down within the earth, those two formations fusing together beneath the earth suddenly began to turn in reverse. This sudden shift immediately caused the destructive energy within the formation to clash against itself. Buzz! After what seemed like an eternity, the screams of panic and fear seemed to die away for a moment. In that brief period of silence, the 100,000 God Devil execution formation suddenly stopped, and then the vast and chaotic energy within it broke free. Boom! Geysers of energy rocketed up from the imperial palace, accompanied by choruses of screams. A second later, the 100,000 God Devil execution formation shattered like a mirror, and its energy completely vanished. What's going on here? At the Kuan Gate, Duanjian had been locked in battle with Li Sai. He had just been in the middle of raising his sword, coating it in destructive energy so that he could bring it down on Li Sai's head. But at this moment, the stellar energy in Duanjian's body explosively scattered, immediately dropping his energy level. Duanjian had initially been weaker than Li Sai, and he had been relying on the formation to just barely keep up with him. This sudden drop in strength left him startled and shocked. At this level of strength, he was no match for Li Sai, but there was still much more for him to be shocked about. Clang, clang, clang. A metal clattering came from behind, and when Duanjian turned his head, he saw that the three formation halos around his soldiers had begun to flicker and shatter. As these halos rapidly lost power, his men cried out in alarm and his ranks fell into chaos. At this moment, Duanjian also heard a tsunami-like roar coming from the depths of the palace. "The formation is broken?" Duanjian understood what had happened, his heart sinking like a stone. On the other side, Li Sai bellowed as he raised his sword and slashed down. At the center gate and Chen Gate, similar scenes were taking place. It was like a core piece of a vast and complicated war machine had suddenly exploded, causing the entire thing to fall apart. The 100,000 God Devil execution formation had thoroughly collapsed, and without the formation's power, the Imperial army was suddenly weakened and found it hard to hold the line. Kill! At the three gates, Wang Chong's soldiers surged forward like a torrential flood, blasting through the opposition and charging deeper into the palace. In the distance, Fei Yuhan and the other Eastern Palace soldiers heard the sounds of fighting and paled. In the end, Wang Chong had managed to break through the imperial army. Wonderful! The fifth prince and his Jinyang Palace soldiers were elated. No one had expected Wang Chong to reverse such a dire situation, destroying the 100,000 God Devil execution formation in the blink of an eye. Your Highness, this is great. The king of foreign lands is truly too formidable. Li Jingzhong looked at the fifth prince, his fists clenched in excitement. Just a few moments ago he had thought that everything was over, but now the balance had suddenly tipped in their favor. Your Highness, wonderful! Mayasame Ayaka's eyes were bright as she sighed in relief. No matter how bad the situation was, she was confident that Wang Chong would always be able to reverse the tides, and reality had not let down her hopes. In this world, there was nothing that her liege could not handle. This was a conviction held by every member of the King of Foreign Lands residents. I truly underestimated you, Ho Junji gravely said, staring at Wang Chong. The Tongluo cavalry were stopped at the palace gates. But once the Tongluo were dealt with, those soldiers did not head for the center, Qian, or Kuan gates. Did you send them to the east gate? Yes. As I expected. I can't hide anything from Senior. Wang Chong faintly smiled, his body exuding a natural confidence and majesty. In the younger generation, he was probably the only one who was able to compare to the bearing of the army-shattering war god. Even Fei Yuhan and the other Eastern Palace soldiers couldn't help but look at Wang Chong in reverence. In order to increase its strength, Senior restricted your 100,000 God Devil execution formation to a smaller area that only covered the region between the Qian, Center, and Kuan gates and Taiji Palace. Trying to force one's way through Senior's formation in 30 minutes is not possible, so I could only think of a detour. Fortunately, Senior's formation was small enough that I only needed to cover the south, east, west, and north gates. By using them as the perimeter and the three Emperors' formation as a core, with Senior's formation as the inner ring, I was naturally able to fuse the formations together. Wang Chong smiled as he casually explained. Most importantly, Senior was completely focused on those three gates, thinking that I would try to force my way through them. You didn't guard any other places. So this junior had enough time to arrange everything. Buzz. Ho Junji and Fei Yuhan scowled. It wasn't that Ho Junji had been too careless with regard to Wang Chong, nor was it that he had never thought of this possibility. It was just that Wang Chong's plan was too absurd. No one besides him even understood the essence of the 100,000 God Devil execution formation. Putting a formation around a formation and then detonating the internal formation was theoretically sound, but such a proposition could only exist on paper. Ho Junji had never even considered this possibility in his plans. Even when it came to someone like the army-shattering war god, Wang Chong's style of fighting was truly unconventional. Putting aside Ho Junji, Wang Chong slowly looked toward the depths of the imperial palace, where the sounds of fighting could still be heard. Li Sai and the others were currently advancing at full speed, and the defensive live that Ho Junji had gone through such great pains to establish was collapsing on all fronts. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. By the way, Senior, those officials the first prince imprisoned in Taiha Palace? You don't need to worry about them anymore. Wang Chong looked toward where the sounds of fighting were loudest and smiled. Senior is known as the army-shattering war god, so this lowly one did not dare to be careless. But this junior's reinforcements were never outside Taiha Palace. They were always inside. What? Ho Junji and Fei Yuhan instantly paled. This is impossible. The one who had said this was not Ho Junji, but Fei Yuhan. There are only officials and the general we assigned to guard the area inside Taiha Palace. You can't have possibly inserted soldiers within. There's nowhere to hide in that place. The matter of Taiha Palace was extremely important, as even if the rebellion succeeded, the first prince would still have to obtain the acknowledgement of the people of the realm to become the true successor of the sage emperor. This necessitated the acknowledgement of the major officials, and so those officials imprisoned inside Taiha Palace played a critical role in the first prince's plans. More importantly, The first prince had given Fei Yuhan the duty of carrying out this mission. Fei Yuhan's men had been the ones to move those officials out. And we inspected all those people. There's no way you could have pulled any tricks, Fei Yuhan sharply said. Hou Junji said nothing, but his face slowly turned grave. Although he wasn't responsible for this matter, he had specifically instructed Fei Yuhan to investigate all the officials Wang Chong was on good terms with to prevent any tricks. Logically speaking, Wang Chong could never have succeeded in any plan. Haha, of course you would investigate those officials I was on good terms with or who opposed the first prince, and this really wouldn't take much effort. However, did you also investigate those officials the first prince was on good terms with? If I recall correctly, the Grand Preceptor didn't come to today's morning court session. Wang Chong glanced at Fei Yuhan and smirked. Whoosh! Upon hearing this, the man turned ghastly pale. Wang Chong was right. While more than half of the capital's top nobles and officials had participated in today's morning court session, the Grand Preceptor had not appeared. But as the Grand Preceptor was very old and was on the first prince's side, there was little need for him to appear. But Fei Yuhan clearly recalled that though the Grand Preceptor had not come, he had sent someone to observe and listen in his place. Could it be? Fei Yuhan once more looked at Wang Chong's smirk, and he instantly understood what had happened. Despair surged over him. He had done his best to defend against any tricks, but he had never expected this move from Wang Chong. Withdraw! Hou Junji called out and then quickly turned to look at Wang Chong. To think that after 60 years, an individual like you would appear amongst the youth of the Great Tang. The Grand Preceptor is of extremely high status and is on good terms with the first prince, so no one would take notice of him, and you exploited this very fact. If my guess is correct, those officials in Taihe Palace were already taken away by your infiltrators. Those soldiers were merely a distraction. Naturally, those officials were taken away by my infiltrators, so Senior has no need to continue worrying about it. Wang Chong indifferently said. In addition, the Four Quarters Embassy, the Wang clan residence, and the King Song residence? Senior doesn't need to keep worrying about them either. Thanks to Senior, this junior long ago made plans, and those places should be safe and sound. The soldiers Senior sent probably won't be coming back. And Senior also does not need to concern yourself over Zhang Zheng's army? Wang Chong faintly smiled. Whoosh! Hou Junji could still salvage the matter of the officials being saved from Taihe Palace. But when Wang Chong mentioned Zhang Zheng's army, he couldn't help but shiver. What do you mean? Once this night was over, the news of the rebellion in the Imperial Palace was certain to cause even greater turmoil. In any dynasty, a changing of governments was bound to cause an uproar in society, and when done poorly, would cause uprisings amongst the populace. In these situations, the armies on the border would play an important role. Only with the combined efforts of the Imperial Army and the border armies could the situation be stabilized. This was why Hou Junji had mobilized Zhang Zheng's biting protectorate army. But Wang Chong was indicating that things were not as simple as he had imagined. Has Senior not noticed that Zhang Zheng's army has yet to enter the capital? Wang Chong nonchalantly asked. Hou Junji, Fei Yuhan, and all the Imperial Army soldiers grimaced. Yes, nearly 30 minutes had gone by, so Zhang Zheng's army should have already entered. But now that they listened, they found the capital rather quiet. A city through which tens of thousands of soldiers were marching could never be so quiet. What did you do? Did you still have soldiers? Hou Junji suddenly asked. He had been observing Wang Chong this entire time and had determined that there was no way he could still have soldiers. Moreover, Zhang Zheng had already reached Gold Bull Mountain. If someone had come to stop him, it wouldn't be so quiet outside the capital. The sounds of such a battle should have been audible from the palace. Dealing with Zhang Zheng doesn't need that many soldiers. I simply sent Senior a piece of paper. A vicious light flashed in Wang Chong's eyes. The mention of this piece of paper caused Hou Junji and Fei Yuhan to tremble in shock and understanding, and they were rendered speechless. Silence. The entire area fell into an eerie silence. Wang Chong and Hou Junji silently stared at each other, both their eyes gleaming as brightly as stars and as sharply as swords. When evil grew 1 foot taller, the righteous would grow by 10 feet. In this chess game, Hou Junji and Wang Chong had been scheming against each other. But the one thing Hou Junji had not expected was that the letter he and the first prince had received from Zhang Zheng was a forgery. To think that Wang Chong's plans would be this meticulous. His calculations had seemingly begun even before the start of this game. Good. Hou Junji finally broke the deathly stillness. Truly amazing. As expected of Su Zhengxin's disciple. You forged a letter from Zhang Zheng, and if my guess is correct, you've also taken control of the capital's outer gates. Wang Chong said nothing, as there was no need to answer. Neither he nor Hou Junji could have left any obvious flaws in their plans. By now, the outer gates of the capital had naturally fallen into his hands. You've truly got a good head on your shoulders, and even I must express some praise for your abilities. Su Zhengxin went his entire life without taking a disciple, but he was truly fortunate to find someone like you in his twilight years. So what a pity it is that despite your outstanding abilities, you chose to stand on the wrong side. Hou Junji placed his hands behind his back, took in a deep breath, and regained his composure. Even though you forged Zhang Zheng's letter, broke my 100,000 God Devil execution formation, and saved the officials in Taihe Palace, you still can't change anything. The Imperial Army is still within the Imperial Palace, and you will need several hours to break through them. In addition, I have also stationed a force at the gate leading to Taiji Palace, Chongqing Gate, commanded by Grand Marshal Bai Hanzhou. You will need even more time to break through that force. But alas, you don't have the time. If all goes as expected, the battle at the heart of the Imperial Palace will soon be over. Once all the dragon guards fall, no one will be left to stop the Imperial Army. Despite all you've done, in the end, you will still lose. Hou Junji shook his head and shot Wang Chong a pitying gaze. Making plans truly was important, but in the end, one also needed to look at one's strength and luck. Wang Chong was very capable, but in Hou Junji's eyes, his struggles were futile. You said so much, but in the end, Senior has not won and the dust has not settled. Is that not so? Wang Chong was surprisingly nonchalant. Hou Junji was taken aback and fell silent. This wasn't the first time Wang Chong had said this tonight, and while he might have scoffed at first, after all that had happened, even someone as conceited as him didn't dare to say any more. Hiss! In the bronze incense burner, the last sliver of smoke slowly dispersed into the air. The match on the board was over, but not the battle within the Imperial Palace. The winds continued to carry the roar of battle. Li Sai, Guizi, and the Lone Silence ancestor were advancing with their army at astonishing speed toward Chongqing Gate, which was guarded by Hanzhou. The soldiers at the center gate, Qian Gate, and Kuan Gate were no longer capable of stopping them. Wang Chong was waiting, and so was Hou Junji. Wang Chong was waiting for the news that Chongqing Gate had fallen, and Hou Junji was waiting for the news that Taiji Palace had fallen. This battle had reached its final act, and despite the chess game being over, the surrounding area remained brimming with tension. Deep within the palace at Chongqing Gate, that kid truly can't be underestimated. He even managed to break Hou Junji's formation. Atop a high palace wall stood a slender figure in a black robe. A design featuring 7 bright stars had been woven onto the chest of the robe. The Tianfu Divine Lord. Wang Chong would have immediately recognized this man as the Tianfu Divine Lord he had previously defeated. Although the Tianfu Divine Lord had been defeated, he had not been injured and could still fight. In this rebellion, the Tianfu Divine Lord had been assigned as the guardian of Chongqing Gate. Haha, I just think that it's rather unfortunate that that kid was just too cautious. Earlier, if he had just taken a few steps forward, this battle would have already been over. The Tianfu Divine Lord had barely spoken when another voice came from 4 or 5 steps away. Another man, dressed in the same attire as the Tianfu Divine Lord, was standing there. The seething energy in his body indicated that his cultivation was on par with the Tianfu Divine Lord. This man was the Tianshu Divine Lord. In this rebellion, Hou Junji had placed Bai Hanzhou to guard the Chongqing Gate, as well as the Tianfu Divine Lord and Tianshu Divine Lord, 2 powerful subtle realm experts. Earlier, if Wang Chong had tried to step past the center gate, thus entering the domain of the 100,000 God Devil Execution Formation, he would have faced the attacks of the Tianshu and Tianfu Divine Lords along with Bai Hanzhou. Other experts would promptly arrive to reinforce them, and only death would await Wang Chong. Alas, Wang Chong had been too cautious and had ultimately decided to not go through. Whoosh! The two stood on the wall, their robes rustling in the howling wind. Dark plumes of smoke rose from the imperial palace, fires blazed, and the din of fighting alarmed the heavens. And a great rumbling of hooves was getting louder and louder as it rapidly approached this place. From their vantage point, the two could see a vast flood of soldiers sweeping toward them. The center gate had fallen. The Qian gate had fallen. The Kuan gate had fallen. All the imperial army soldiers between the Chongqing gate and the center gate had been scattered into complete disarray. But even so, the two divine lords were utterly unperturbed. Humph! Nothing but a pile of ants. With us here, no one can even think about passing through. As the army got closer and closer, their eyes turned cold and domineering. Close the gate. The heavy doors of Chongqing Gate slammed shut. At the same time, an army in orderly formation swiftly took up position behind it. Above the gate, the two divine lords swept their eyes across the approaching army and swiftly spotted the lone silence ancestor, Li Sai and Guizi. At that moment, their eyes were frigid beads of ice. One needed to shoot the horse to shoot the man, and capture the king to subdue his soldiers. They just needed to kill these commanders to make this disorderly mob fall apart. Bai Hanzhou, have your men guard the gate. Don't let a single person through. Leave the rest to us. The Tianfu Divine Lord looked down at the lone silence ancestor, a cruel gleam in his eyes. Bai Hanzhou just needed to hold the gate while they killed the commanders, and then no one would be able to get past Chongqing Gate and disrupt their plans. The Tianfu Divine Lord wickedly smiled, and then he jumped from the wall. Although the army down below numbered nearly 10,000, they were nothing to subtle realm experts like the Tianfu Divine Lord and Tianshu Divine Lord. In the middle of this army, the lone silence ancestor, seated upon a captured horse, suddenly narrowed his eyes and cried out in alarm, "Careful!" The lone silence ancestor was a peak great general and possessed a powerful sense for danger. As they approached Chongqing Gate, he had noticed those two black-robed figures on the wall. Those two black-robed men radiated an extremely menacing aura. Ha! A fast reaction, but it's still too late. Floating in the air, the Tianfu Divine Lord shook his wrist, and his stellar energy transformed into black smoke. Sharp awls appeared within the smoke. His supreme technique, the star awls of the Southern Dipper. Ho Junji listened to the fighting coming from the depths of the imperial palace and suddenly declared, "You can't win this battle. There are tens of thousands of soldiers stationed at Chongqing Gate. Based on the speed you needed to destroy my formation, even if you're lucky, I predict you'll need at least 10 minutes to get through, but you don't even have that." "Heh, Senior is so certain?" Wang Chong asked, his eyes bright and his lips smirking. "It's good that the young are confident, but blind confidence is simply arrogance." Ho Junji chuckled. Wang Chong's abilities truly had taken him by surprise, and it had truly surprised him how quickly the center, Qian, and Kuan gates had fallen. But the Chongqing Gate was another matter entirely. "I've already ordered Bai Hanzhou to remain on the defensive. In addition, I've also given him a formation I developed. No matter how powerful your troops are, you can never break through in 10 minutes. Ah! Ho Junji cried out in alarm as a scream came from the direction of Chongqing Gate. At the same time, there was a great rumbling as the doors of Chongqing Gate suddenly opened. Ho Junji instantly paled. Impossible! Ho Junji's mind was in turmoil, and there was only one thought in his mind. "Heh! I forgot to tell you. Bai Hanzhou was actually on my side from the very start." Wang Chong finally revealed the truth. His statement left everyone slack-jawed and wide-eyed. A few moments before, at Chongqing Gate, the Tianfu Divine Lord had just been preparing to attack the lone silence ancestor. Ah! A scream came from behind him, causing the Tianfu Divine Lord to turn around in shock, upon which he saw an unbelievable sight. Above Chongqing Gate, The Tianshu Divine Lord's body was stiff, a sharp sword protruding out of his chest. Behind him, a familiar white-armored figure clenched the hilt of the sword. Down below, those Imperial Army soldiers that were responsible for defending the gate had instead opened the gate, allowing the enemy army to enter. Bai Hanzhou! The Tianfu Divine Lord almost stopped breathing. He had never imagined that one of the first prince's most favored generals would actually attack them. Bang! With no time to think, the Tianfu Divine Lord shot over and thrust a palm at Bai Hanzhou. Protect the general! The soldiers behind Bai Hanzhou seemed prepared for this. They rushed up to his side and assembled into a basic defensive formation that fused their energies with Bai Hanzhou's. This was the formation Hou Junji had given him to use against Wang Chong's forces. Boom! The Tianfu Divine Lord's palm struck, causing Bai Hanzhou and his bodyguards to cry out as they were blown backward. However, the formation had dispersed and weakened the attack enough for Bai Hanzhou to avoid a fatal blow. Unforgivable. Absolutely unforgivable. The Tianshu Divine Lord slowly turned around, a savage look on his face. Despite his heavy injury, he seemed completely unaffected and maintained an impressive amount of strength. Die for me! With a dour look on his face, the Tianshu Divine Lord thrust out a palm. But Bai Hanzhou had been ready, and he pushed his right palm against the ground, narrowly dodging the strike. But the Imperial Army soldiers behind him screamed as they were blasted into the air by the Tianshu Divine Lord's terrifying black stellar energy, together with countless pieces of debris. Just who are these people? Bai Hanzhou's heart sank like a stone. The first prince had sent these men over, but he had given no explanation of their background. Bai Hanzhou had not expected them to be this powerful. Everyone, come with me. Seeing what was happening in the distance, the Lone Silence ancestor, Li Sai, Guizi, Heaven Deaf, Earth Mute, and many other experts, including the three elders of the Northern Sea, flew up to Chongqing Gate. Kill! At the same time, their soldiers charged through Chongqing Gate. These damn ants! This god will have all of you killed. Upon seeing those numerous soldiers charging through the gate beneath him, the Tianfu Divine Lord snarled, endless killing intent churning in his eyes. Boom! With a single palm, 100 cavalry were blasted through the air like ragdolls. Haha, you think that this is enough to get through? Ghost slaves, come out! The Tianshu Divine Lord was also none too happy to see the final defensive line to the depths of the Imperial Palace about to fall, and he sharply whistled, the sound cutting through the darkness like an arrow. Cree! Numerous sharp cries came in response, and soon, numerous black silhouettes were converging on Chongqing Gate. Kill them all! The Tianshu Divine Lord ordered in his intimidating and brutal voice. As the men in black converged, their bodies swelled and twisted, and they began to transform into half Luwus, half Jubis, and Azuras, howling and bellowing like true devils of the underworld. Ah! Moreover, as everyone else was focused on these approaching men in black, inhuman roars came from the ranks of Bai Hanzhou's soldiers. Several dozen men who had been wearing the armor of the Imperial Army had begun to roar as they swiftly transformed into monsters. Bang! An Imperial Army soldier who was beginning to take formation suddenly saw a blurry figure appear in front of him. A moment later, there was a cold gleam as an inhuman palm thrust through his chest. His sturdy armor shattered like glass, unable to even last for a second. What monster is this? The soldier's eyes were round with disbelief as blood gushed out of his mouth. A few moments later, he was dead. Bang! 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 As this Imperial Army soldier collapsed, soldiers around him were being blown into the air by these men in black that were transformed into half-human, half-beast monsters. These men in black were like tigers in a flock of sheep, and not a single person was able to take a single blow from them. Hold! Hold! The soldiers assembled into formations and tried their best to stop the men in black, but they were powerless against these men who possessed both massive size and impressive agility. Whoosh! A black ball of flame erupted from the hand of a man in black and engulfed an Imperial Army soldier. That man only had time to bitterly scream before the fire of Mara burned both him and his stellar energy to ash. Under the frenzied attacks of the men in black, the ranks of the Imperial Army crumpled. Scorching ash drifted through the air as the men in black charged at the gate. Boom! At the same time, the Tianfu Divine Lord summoned his churning black energy and thrust out a palm, sending the lone silence ancestor, Li Sai, and the others flying away. The remaining power of his blow struck several hundred Imperial Army soldiers on the ground. All of them screamed as they were tossed about like fallen leaves. "You accursed mortals! I'll kill you all! And you, for daring to injure this god, I'll tear your corpse to pieces." The Tianshu Divine Lord, seeing that the situation was slowly stabilizing, swiftly turned his cold and sinister gaze on Bai Hanzhou. He would not forget that it was Bai Hanzhou who had ambushed him and stabbed him in the back. If he had not reacted quickly and used his powerful cultivation to move his heart at the last moment, he would have truly died at Bai Hanzhou's hands. To be wounded and almost killed by a mortal was not something the Tianshu Divine Lord could tolerate. Only death could wash away his shame. Buzz! Bai Hanzhou's pupils constricted as he sensed the Tianshu Divine Lord's killing intent, and his face paled. Everything had gone exactly according to his plan. He had taken control of Chongqing Gate and backstabbed the Divine Lords, but Bai Hanzhou had never expected them to be this powerful. An intense sense of danger welled up in his mind. Bang! The Tianshu Divine Lord disappeared in a flash of light. At the same time, Bai Hanzhou shivered as every muscle in his body tensed and he began to burn his stellar energy. With no time to think, Bai Hanzhou lunged to the side. Great white triple radiance. Sword chi erupted from his body, blazing with a light hundreds of times brighter than the sun. This sword chi then divided into 3 streams of energy that shot off in 3 different directions. Bai Hanzhou himself had developed this technique. It was an offensive technique that could hammer an opponent with 3 damaging blows, but at this time, Bai Hanzhou was using it to avoid the Tianshu Divine Lord's lethal strike. Boom! Boom! Bai Hanzhou's 2 dazzling clones were only able to make it a few dozen feet before the Tianshu Divine Lord exploded them. The third Bai Hanzhou twisted in the air, trying its best to dodge, but it was still struck by the Tianshu Divine Lord's attack. Ah! Bai Hanzhou's body trembled, and he vomited blood as he was sent flying back. But the great white triple radiance had proved useful, allowing him to avoid a fatal wound. As Bai Hanzhou was knocked away, there were 2 more thuds. Outside Chongqing Gate, Li Sai and the Lone Silence Ancestor had been unable to withstand the Tianfu Divine Lord's attacks, and they had been blasted outward along with the 3 elders of the Northern Sea and the other martial arts experts. Humph, you foolish ants! Did you think you could win with this? In front of a god, all of you are nothing but grains of dust. The cold snorts of the Tianfu Divine Lord and Tianshu Divine Lord resounded through the world. Boom! The 2 thrust out their palms at the same time, and the world swayed as their majestic stellar energy slammed into Li Sai, the 3 elders of the Northern Sea, and many Wuxiang cavalry. These Wuxiang cavalry had meteoric metal armor, but they were still unable to stop this terrifying energy. Kaboom! Several dozen Wuxiang cavalry struck the ground, and their suits of armor cracked and crumpled into balls, blood pouring out from within. Too powerful! Too powerful! We can't beat them! How did the Eastern Palace get such frightening experts? Li Sai was covered in blood, his eyes were crimson, and his teeth were clenched so hard that they were on the verge of shattering. He had pushed his cultivation to its limits and had even used the 5 Hells God Devil Slash. But none of his techniques were any match for the black-robed Divine Lords. It's no good. We're all dead if this goes on. Blood was trickling from the lips of the 3 elders of the Northern Sea. After King Qi was defeated, the situation had been settled. The only person willing to hire from the martial arts world was Wang Chong. The 3 of them had only thought about showing off their abilities a little so that Wang Chong would recruit them, but they had never expected to fight such a terrifying opponent. They were extremely old experts of the martial arts world, even above the likes of Song Yuanyi and Xie Guangting. These 3 had always possessed very high opinions of themselves, and in terms of martial arts, each of them was on par with the Lone Silence Ancestor. But in front of these Divine Lords, all 3 felt an immense fear. This was a power so great that it sank one into despair. Those 3 sensed that there was no hope of victory against the 2 Divine Lords, not even if Wang Chong came in person. Release! In the distance, Chun Burang waved his hand, and 10 ballistae thundered in response, firing together with numerous master archers, the bolts and arrows flying toward the two divine lords. But without even looking, the pair blinked away, easily dodging the attacks. Kaboom! The Tianfu divine lord casually thrust a palm, and a moment later, there was a tremendous explosion, instantly annihilating the 10 ballistae. The master archers also suffered numerous losses, and screams rang out through the air as severed limbs rained down. If not for the cavalry constantly charging in to hold the line, the army would have already been routed, and even Li Sai and the others slain. But even so, they were just barely managing to hold on. Ha ha ha! This is what happens to those who make enemies of the gods. All of you will die here today. The Tianshu divine lord said in his sinister and murderous voice. Bai Hanzhou's strike had both heavily injured him and stimulated his killing intent. Boom boom boom. If the Tianshu divine lord's goal had initially been to hunt down Bai Hanzhou, he no longer cared. His goal was now purely killing, and not just Bai Hanzhou. Everyone here had to die. This god will make all of you taste despair. As this cruel voice resounded through the air, explosions began going off. As each ball of black stellar energy crashed down, hundreds of cavalry were thrown into the air. The attacks of the two divine lords soon covered the front of Chongqing Gate in corpses. In the depths of the imperial palace, the transformed men in black were continuing their frenzied attacks, and the dragon guards in front of Taiji Palace were continuing to fall. Kill, kill, kill. Kill them all. The first prince stood far in the back, a savage expression on his face. While the dragon guards were exceptionally powerful and took many men in black down with them, those men in black continued to fearlessly charge forward. I'd like to see if anyone can stop me today, the first prince snarled. Soldiers were trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. It would only take a few more moments for all the dragon guards to be slain. It had truly been worth courting the men in black. No matter what, no matter the price, he needed to seize the throne and become the true sovereign of the 9 and 5. Ah! Screams continued to ring out from the imperial palace, and the situation rapidly turned against Wang Chong's forces. The smoke grew thicker and thicker as the fires blazed more and more fiercely, illuminating the skies above the capital. Yet the clashing of weapons and screams of dying men traveled far into the darkness. In the distance, Ho Junji could tell from the screams that the battle was once more in his favor. The Eastern Palace had seized the upper hand and was pushing its advantage. Ha! Was this your plan? Ho Junji turned to Wang Chong. A single strong man could take 10 martial artists. It didn't matter that Wang Chong had persuaded Bai Hanzhou and planted him at the first prince's side. Ho Junji hadn't expected this, but in the face of absolute power, all these tricks were useless. Wang Chong said nothing, but his expression was extremely solemn. The fate of the empire was on the line in this battle. Numerous eyes were watching it from the shadows. Far from the imperial palace, in the most spacious and revered Su residence, all was dark and gloomy. The back garden was sparsely lit by a few weak torches. The Su residence was as dark and suffocating as any other place in the capital at this time. But at this time, within the back garden, an elderly figure was seated on a bamboo chair and staring in the direction of the imperial palace. That child! He can't hold on for much longer. Su Zhengchen suddenly sighed, a complicated look in his eyes.